Hello and welcome to Miss Clark Reads to You. We are reading another Mitch Albom book. We are reading The Five People You Meet in Heaven. And this is a New York Times bestseller. The dedication is to Edward Beachman, my beloved uncle, who gave me my first concept of heaven. Every year, around the Thanksgiving table, he spoke of a night in the hospital when he awoke to see the souls of his departed loved ones sitting on the edge of the bed waiting for him. I never forgot that story, and I never forgot him. Everyone has an idea of heaven, as do most religions, and they should be respected. The version represented here is only a guess, a wish in some ways, that my uncle and others like him, people who felt unimportant here on earth, realized finally how much they mattered and how much they were loved. And it starts at the end. This is a story about a man named Eddie. And it begins at the end with Eddie dying in the sun. It might seem strange to start a story with an ending, but all endings are also beginnings. We just don't know it at the time. The last hour of Eddie's life was spent, like most of the others, at Ruby Pier, an amusement park by a great gray ocean. The park had the usual attractions: a boardwalk, a Ferris wheel, roller coasters, bumper cars, a taffy stand, and an arcade where you could shoot streams of water into a clown's mouth. It also had a big new ride called Freddy's Free Fall. And this would be where Eddie would be killed in an accident that would make newspapers around the state. At the time of his death, Eddie was a squat, white-haired old man with a short neck, a barrel chest, thick forearms, and a faded army tattoo on his right shoulder. His legs were thin and veined now, and his left knee, wounded in the war, was ruined by arthritis. He used a cane to get around. His face was broad and craggy from the sun, with salty whiskers and a lower jaw that protruded slightly, making him look prouder than he felt. He kept a cigarette behind his left ear and a ring of keys hooked to his belt. He wore rubber-soled shoes. He wore an old linen cap. His pale brown uniform suggested a working man, and a working man he was. Eddie's job was maintaining the rides, which really meant keeping them safe. Every afternoon, he walked the park, checking on each attraction, from the tilt-a-whirl to the pipeline plunge. He looked for broken boards, loose bolts, worn-out steel. Sometimes he would stop, his eyes glazing over, and people walking past thought something was wrong. But he was listening, that's all. After all these years, he could hear trouble. He said, in the spits and stutters and thrumming of the equipment. With 50 minutes left on Earth, Eddie took his last walk along Ruby Pier. He passed an elderly couple. "Folks," he mumbled, touching his cap. They nodded politely. Customers knew Eddie. At least the regular ones did. They saw him summer after summer. One of those faces you associate with a place. His work shirt had a patch on the chest that read, Eddie. The word above the word, maintenance. And sometimes they would say, "Hi, Eddie Maintenance," although he never thought that was funny. Today, it so happened, was Eddie's birthday, his 83rd. A doctor last week had told him he had shingles. Shingles? Eddie didn't even know what they were. Once he had been strong enough to list a carousel horse in each arm. That was a long time ago. "Eddie!" Take me, Eddie! Take me! 40 minutes until his death. Eddie made his way to the front of the roller coaster line. He rode every attraction at least once a week to be certain the brakes and steering were solid. Today was coaster day. The Ghoster Coaster, they called this one, and the kids who knew Eddie yelled to get in the cart with him. Children liked Eddie. Not teenagers. Teenagers gave him headaches. Over the years, Eddie figured he'd seen every sort of do-nothing, snarl-at-you teenager there was. But children were different. Children looked at Eddie, who, with his protruding lower jaw, always seemed to be grinning like a dolphin, and they trusted him. They drew in like cold hands to a fire. They hugged his leg. They played with his keys. Eddie mostly grunted, never saying much. He figured it was because he didn't say much that they liked him. Now, Eddie tapped two little boys with backward baseball caps, and they raced to the cart and tumbled in. Eddie handed his cane to the ride attendant and slowly lowered himself between the two. Here we go. Here we go, one of the boys squealed as the other pulled Eddie's arm around his shoulder. Eddie lowered the lap bar and clack, 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 clack. Up they went. A story went around about Eddie. When he was a boy, growing up by this very same pier, he got in an alley fight. 5 kids from Pitkin Avenue had cornered his brother, Joe, and were about to give him a beating. Eddie was a block away, on a stoop, eating a sandwich, and he heard his brother scream. He ran to the alley. He grabbed a garbage can lid and he sent 2 boys to the hospital. After that, Joe didn't talk to him for months. He was ashamed. Joe was the oldest and the firstborn, but it was Eddie who did the fighting. Can we go again, Eddie, please? 34 minutes to live. Eddie lifted the lap bar, gave each boy a sucking candy, retrieved his cane, then limped to the maintenance shop to cool down from the summer heat. Had he known his death was imminent, he might have gone somewhere else. Instead, he did what we all do. He went about his dull routine as if all the days in the world were still to come. One of the shop workers, a lanky, bony-cheeked young man named Dominguez, was by the solvent sink, wiping grease off a wheel. "Yo, Eddie," he said. "Tom," Eddie said. The shop smelled like sawdust. It was dark and cramped with a low ceiling and pegboard walls that held drills and saws and hammers. Skeleton parts of fun park rides were everywhere. Compressors, engines, belts, light bulbs. The top of a pirate's head. Stacked against one wall were coffee cans of nails and screws. And stacked against another wall were endless tubs of grease. Greasing a track, Eddie would say, required no more brains than washing a dish. The only difference was you got dirtier as you did it, not cleaner. And that was the sort of work that Eddie did. He spread grease, adjusted brakes, tightened bolts, checked electrical panels. Many times he had longed to leave this place, find different work, build another kind of life. But the war came. His plans never worked out. In time, he found himself graying and wearing looser pants and in a state of weary acceptance. This was who he was and who he would always be. A man with sand in his shoes and a world of mechanical laughter and grilled frankfurters. Like his father before him, like the patch on his shirt, Eddie was maintenance, the head of maintenance. As the kids sometimes called him, the ride man at Ruby Pier. 30 minutes left. "Hey, happy birthday, I hear," Dominguez said. Eddie grunted. No party or nothing? Eddie looked at him as if he were crazy. For a moment he thought how strange it was to be growing old in a place that smelled of cotton candy. Well, remember, Eddie, I'm off next week, starting Monday, going to Mexico. Eddie nodded, and Dominguez did a little dance. Me and Teresa, gonna see the whole family. Pa-a-te. He stopped dancing when he noticed Eddie staring. You ever been? Dominguez said. Been? To Mexico. Eddie exhaled. Kid, I've never been anywhere I wasn't shipped to with a rifle. He watched Dominguez return to the sink. He thought for a moment, then he took a small wad of bills from his pocket and removed the only 20s he had, 2 of them. He held them out. Get your wife something nice, Eddie said. Dominguez regarded the money, and he broke into a huge smile. Come on, man. You sure? Eddie pushed the money into Dominguez's palm. Then he walked out back to the storage area. A small fishing hole had been cut into the boardwalk planks years ago, and Eddie lifted the plastic cap. He tugged on a nylon line that dropped 80 feet to the sea. A piece of bologna was still attached. We catch anything? Dominguez yelled. Tell me we caught something. Eddie wondered how the guy could be so optimistic. There was never anything on that line. One day, Dominguez yelled, we're gonna get a halibut. Yep, Eddie mumbled, although he knew you could never pull a fish that big through a hole that small. And we're going to stop there on page 7. And if you'd like to stop the video and think for a moment and make a book, a brain, or a heart connection, when you make a book connection, you are connecting with the book, with the author, perhaps, looking at the elements of fiction. What is the setting? Who are the characters that you're introduced to so far? If you make a brain connection, you are being challenged somehow, or perhaps you have a question that you'd like to have answered, something that you might predict. If you are making a heart connection, you're starting to think about how something in this book might be challenging you in an emotional or intellectual way. So stop in the video and make that connection now, and then turn it on and I'll share with you my connection. So I think I'm making a book connection right now. I'm thinking about who my main characters are and what my main characters do for a living. So Eddie, being head of maintenance, maintains the rides. He rides at least, I believe, 1 ride a week. Just to know how it's running, and he grabs kids with him on the rides. And then he has this coworker, Dominguez, who is going to Mexico, who Eddie appears to be very generous with Dominguez and gives him a couple 20s to buy something nice for his wife. And another really strong character connection I make is how Eddie has never really been anywhere except for Ruby Pier, unless he was in war. So my guess is that perhaps we're going to, which is a brain connection, we're going to hear more about at some point the war. And Eddie is at the end of his life. The last note was that he, at this point, has about, I think, 34 minutes to live. I look forward to seeing you again. We will pick up where we left off, and thank you for joining me. I look forward to reading to you again. Bye-bye.